Christopher, the Bishop of Coventry.
First International Coffee Shop Sunday is taking place in Coventry. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to send this little word of thanks for coming to Coventry, and I hope encouragement for this extraordinary work that is happening now across the world. I'm speaking from a little chapel here in the house where I live in Coventry, and it's a lovely space. It was created by my predecessor. His predecessor had another chapel upstairs. It was quite a very suitable room for a chapel. It looked chapel-like. It had sort of, sloping roof. And I remember telling that bishop that actually I now pray in this place downstairs. And he at first looked a little bit disappointed, but then he said, well, actually, there's not a big difference between a chapel and a kitchen. They're both, he put it, sacramental. People come together and they spend time together and they eat together, they talk, they get to know each other, and they discover God in their midst. Kitchens, coffee shops, maybe a little bit similar, places where people gather, ordinary places where the ordinary things of life happen. And what you're discovering is the Jesus truth, that God is in the ordinary places, and we see that in Jesus' ministry in beautiful ways. God encountering people in the ordinary places of life, especially as they perhaps take a bit of time to come together, be with each other, and sit and eat together. It's been a joy getting to know Trevor Gay a little bit, and finding out more about the work that he's been doing here, and even joining Trevor on an online session. And the way Trevor, and I'm sure many others, were able to move this work onto online is really impressive. Sorry that I can't hear Pete Phillips and Ashley Cooper. I don't think I know Ashley, but I do know Pete, and I know there'll be a lot to learn from Pete, particularly about digital communication in the coronavirus age. Every blessing with all that you're doing, and may you helping people across the world to encounter the God who has come to us into the ordinary place of the world to meet us in Jesus Christ and be with us by God's own Spirit. Bless you all. Thank you.
I'm sure a lot of our international friends will not have seen the pound coins and £2 coins that we have in this country. So you won't know that when they were first introduced, there were things written around the edge of a pound coin. And I wonder if anybody here can remember what the first pound coin said. I'm not good at Latin, but it said something like Decus et Tutamen. And I'm not sure what that means. I think it's something about don't rub this off. This protects the edge. But the first £2 coins had an inscription on them which said, standing on the shoulders of giants. I feel this morning as though I'm standing in the company of giants, because I'm going to introduce our three speakers. And the first of those speakers is Pete Phillips. And Pete, I know, is an expert in digital theology. And a word I was never able to say, and I think I've just learnt to say it, is digital. Couldn't get my tongue round it. But I'm sure Pete will explain to us a little bit about that and what he's going to share with us later on. So can I invite Pete Phillips to come up and to tell us a little bit about his subject.
I want to say, first of all, we're not giants, we're just normal people. And thank you so much. Also, Kristen even mentioned Eunice. So the voice from the Office for the Marginalised was marginalised completely. But that's a bit kind of okay, isn't it, for Coffee Shop Sunday? Because to some extent, this is the church of the marginalised. Yeah, this is the group that got together around this idea of meeting in a coffee shop and then kind of taking that global. And of course, this meeting is in person, both on site and especially online. So welcome to those who are sharing with us on YouTube, either synchronously or asynchronously, either on Saturday morning or whenever in the UK time, or whenever time zone you get there. It's really, really good. Is the camera up here? Hello, nice to see you. It's really good to see you. And hopefully, if there are points and everything that you want to make to us, those of you online, then please do share them. Simon's over there on the computer somewhere, and he'll pick up your messages and kind of feed them through. If you've got questions for us, then just feed them through. In a way, this is a kind of really, really important model of the church without walls, because we are bound here by physical walls in Coventry Central Hall, but we're not bound by spiritual walls. We're part of a much wider community that is online. We saw that from the various global greetings early on. We saw that from that wonderful Lord's Prayer in the many languages and from many continents and so on. We are here as part of God's people across the world, sharing in this in-person, on-site and online community. A church without walls, as the Scottish Church has been saying for the last 30 years, should be the model that we follow. I'm so pleased that it's the model that Birmingham District are following. But it's the spirituality of Coffee Shop Sunday, the spirituality of God's people across the world, the spirituality of a multicultural, multinational group who are worshipping and praising together. I'm sorry, I'm just another middle-aged white man plucked out to kind of talk to you when you've got so many other multinational voices which you could have chosen to kind of come and share and speak with you. So I just want to say a few words and introduce a workshop that I'm hoping to do later and then this afternoon as well. But hopefully, there are other voices that we'll be hearing as well during that time. First of all, let's look at church technology and church lockdown. I want to kind of explore what happened during this lockdown, and I'm going to use this picture. I think we're too far away, John. Do you know? Is it John? Yeah. Thank you. Do you want to push it on? Yeah, thanks. I use this picture that Steve Garner, a friend of mine down in New Zealand, first developed, and then I've kind of taken it on a bit further. But it kind of tracks what happened during this pandemic and what is still happening, because I think we're still in the middle. And for those of you online, you've got a great advantage. We've only got a very small screen here, but you're able to see this on the nice big Zoom share or the YouTube share screen. So that's really good. We've got a kind of little look here, and I'll read one out. But we'll start with the mask and this pragmatic shift as we changed our rhythm of life as we went into lockdown. And then there was this kind of burst of creativity as the church had to be locked down and then kind of improvise and develop new ways of doing church. First of all, live streaming, then onto Zoom Church and YouTube and all manner of things. And then about midway through, do you remember summer last year? The trauma, the exhaustion, the weight of so many people dying really began to kind of prey upon our minds. The lack of an opportunity to grieve, the lack of an opportunity to get hold of ourselves. I remember that was the time when my son decided to, he just finished university and he wasn't going to go into a job. He just scarpered off to the Lake District, got a job with the National Trust on a campsite and worked there over the summer. And he's now got a job at Howard Trust in the Lake District. He couldn't care less about all this urban stuff, yeah? He just wanted to climb mountains, okay? And he's thrived by that, do you know what I mean? Because he's been able to get out there and do something that he wanted to do, rather than fit into all the patterns. But it is a kind of escape, isn't it? Because of the trauma, the exhaustion of what we're all going through. And for many of us here in the UK, we've had an escape through vaccination and everything. That's been great. But of course, across the majority world, vaccination is not an option yet. Very, very few people vaccinated, and therefore that trauma, that exhaustion, remains a big issue that they can't escape from this pandemic as easily as those of us in the West and the global North have been able to do so. So here, we now find ourselves returning to church, kind of coming back to on-site expressions of church, yeah? As well as trying to continue the online expressions of church that we've developed. And that sense of then trying to live in two worlds at the same time, trying to carry on with the online digital stuff, but also reconnect with all the on-site stuff. And that's kind of, it has its own level of exhaustion. And so that figure, that kind of bowed over figure, representing ministry all over the church, as ministers, as those leading worship, as those who are part and parcel of the structure of the church, kind of groan like everybody else with the weight that is upon them. And the cycle at the bottom is that it keeps on going. With the UK now, you know, the highest number of cases per day than, you know, about 40 times most of the countries in Europe. 800 people dying last week, I think it was, as though it's just a number. And yet that's a kind of spiritual weight upon our shoulders as we kind of face that number of people dying regularly. Those who we know who might be ill, whether it's COVID or not, but who are in hospital, not getting the care they need, in care homes like my own mother, not being able to be visited and eat still, and so on. And yet life goes on, and we need to keep pushing forward. And at the moment, we're really pushing on hybrid church. This model of church, this model of being on-site and online at the same time. And praise God, the Methodist Church has now said, at last, that we can do online communion. And some of you will have been doing it for a long time before that. But this sense of sharing bread and wine and sacramentality in this space, in the online on-site space, in the hybrid space, where we can actually say that the God Spirit blows apart our ideas that this is the temple where the Holy Spirit dwells. This may be the temple, but it's joined to this temple as well. That the Holy Spirit goes through that microphone, that camera somehow, and connects with everybody together so that we are all the people of God joined together in the same church body. Adam Sanders, Methodist missions district officer for the Birmingham district nearby, and he did this spectrum some time ago about digital church. And over here on, can we move on? Yes. I'm sorry, I don't know whether I can move. There you are, good. I've got it. I've got my own copy here. You can see on the left here, the church with no digital presence goes all the way over to complexity and completely online digital church on the far right. And the hybrid is somewhere here in the middle. It's not as though you kind of got clogged up here in the middle, coffee shop Sunday. I think you've actually reached the kind of balance point between these two. The idea that a church with no online presence, which doesn't, kind of shuns the digital as though, that's just for the youngsters, you know, all those scary, creepy people are online all the time. Yep. Or the church kind of goes completely online and says, let's become avatars. Simon, talk to Simon about TJ Soto and VR Church in the States, what have you. But we're kind of safely in that middle space, where a church where online and offline participants can all become members and participate fully. It's a really interesting place to be. And perhaps the place that we need to look at more and more into the future as we look at hybrid workplaces, hybrid explorations of youth work, hybrid explorations of church as well. It not just, as one of the guests said, and I think it's Nicky Gumbel, not just for a kind of place for the weaker elements of society, but actually a place for the stronger elements of society. For the pioneers of digital, those who we've called disabled, those who've been called housebound and what have you, who suddenly realise that they are not as disabled as what they thought, as we made them out to be. They're not as housebound as we labelled them, but instead can join us now together in this new experience of hybrid expression of church.
there's lots of things to think about, and in the seminar I want to kind of go through some of those charts and everything and look at where we're going. But there's a few points on this chart, below the red kind of thing. We've got to think about the digital divide in what we're doing. We've got to think about digital poverty and data poverty as well. Data poverty in 2/3 world is much bigger, or the majority world. We have lots of data, it's pretty freely available. Talk to guys in Pretoria, churches there where, South Africa, where data is really expensive, and so they will turn off their data for Facebook and everything all the way through the week, just so they can watch online church on Sunday. Yep. And so we take data for granted more and more. And we need to kind of think about how we provide data for the majority world, We need to include lots of faces to show off our community and our diversity. And that's why, to some extent, I muttered about me being a middle-aged white man coming here to speak, when there are others' voices that we need to come up to speak. People who represent the community as a whole. We need to show off our families, our friends, the whole diversity of this church, both on-site and online. We need to explore justice issues. Micah 6:8, act justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. How do you do that, both online and on-site all the time, so that hybridity is part and parcel, a hybrid version of Micah 6:8? And always giving people an opportunity to connect with you. As I said before, if there are questions from the online congregation, we need to allow them to connect with us. We recently had, I think I'm going to flip over some of these because we don't anymore. We recently had a hybrid circuit down in the Methodist Southeast, hybrid synod down in the Methodist Southeast District. And there's lots of questions going on. How do we get both parts of this body to connect with one another? How do we get those on Zoom to connect with those who are on site? How do we get those with on site? Because, the on site part of this conference, we can meet around and chat and talk during the breaks and everything. Over lunch and so on. We can come and have say, how are you and what have you. But how do we do that with those who are on site, online? How do we engage them? How do they connect with one another? And that's one of the big questions. How do Methodists, in particular, confer in two places? In the online place and the on-site place. How do you bridge that conferral gap, as it were, that we might have? And so lots of possibilities and lots of opportunities. And the final thing I want to say before handing over is, can you move? You haven't been seeing the same slides, have you? Can we move on a bit, please? Next one. The last slide. Next one. Next one. See, there's this one. You see, you can't see this one because there are far too many words. But those online have got a great view of this. Let me point to the yellow bit in the middle, because this is Dave Adamson's discipleship or new church or hybrid church model. And he says, Aussie Dave, he is in Australia, media guy who's turned into kind of hybrid church kind of guru, as it were, over there. That orange bit, the yellow bit in the middle, he says, that's attending a church service, either online or on site. And he says that's God's dating agency. Yep, that's where you meet with God. That's where you connect with God. That's where the church introduces you perhaps to God, or provides a moment of connectivity. The big thing, he says, and I think this is where Coffee Shop Sunday has got it right before they even got to this chart, is all the green stuff is the discipleship stuff. This is the Bible study, this is the prayer groups, this is the learning groups, this is the Alpha course and everything. That's actually where the church grows. That's the green growth of the church, where we really need to move from getting just converts to getting disciples, growing disciples in our churches all over the world. And I think Dave's got a really interesting thing there. All the left on the other thing is just kind of preamble. Kind of connect people, get them into God's dating agency, our on-site and online worship, yep, and then get them embedded into our discipleship programs. And we're going to think about that in the workshop as well. I've spoken for far too long. I'm going to hand over. You're going to introduce the next person? Or just... No, your job, not mine. Thank you.
Never thought of God's dating agency before. So our next speaker, according to my list, is Ashley Cooper, who I've known for a long time, but not as principal of Cliff College in his most recent appointment. It's wonderful to see you here, Ashley, and if you'd like to come and share a little bit of what you're going to talk to us about.
Thanks, Ian. Did the clicker work, Pete, or are we reliant on... Hey. I was asked to give a title for what we're going to have a conversation about in a workshop. And I was reflecting on the most common thing that people said during lockdown: we want to get back. The question is, why do we want to get back? Do we want to get back to something that wasn't working before, or was failing before, or was declining before? Or do we want to use this moment to do something different and move forwards? I have just 2 stories that hopefully will set some of my agenda, and then a number of trends that I want us to have a conversation about. And my workshop will be a conversation about 7 or 8 different trends emerging, and I want to see how they're working in your context, and I'll share some stories from my own. The 2 stories I want to share are actually picking up on something Pete said about trauma. I think trauma and where we are on that journey is absolutely key, and we all have our own stories of trauma. My father-in-law passed away during COVID. It was May 2020. The trauma from my wife, who wasn't able to see her father in the 3 weeks in the run-up to his death, and then missed getting there in time because we live a distance away from the hospital, is a trauma she still, over 12 months, lives with and carries through post this period into the world in which we find ourselves. The trauma of having to leave our children outside the crematorium because there weren't enough seats inside, she carries and we carry with us. We all have our trauma stories, and there is a serious PTSD process that we need to journey with as church and help people through as we look at what it means to move forward as church community. Trauma is going to be part of our story. The other story I wanted to just share comes very early on in the lockdown, when we suddenly discovered Netflix was our best friend. My daughter said to me, my daughter's now 19, I've just deposited her at university and left her. She said to me early on, Dad, you need to watch this program on Netflix. It's amazing. It's about the olden days. The program was a program called Stranger Things. If you've ever watched Stranger Things on Netflix, it's actually about 1983. As I watched, for what my daughter is the olden days, I watched the glory days of my youth lived out on the TV screen with chopper bikes and CB radios. Literally. You thought I'm too young looking for all of that. That's what you're saying. Actually, 2 weeks' time, I hit a grand 5-0, so there we go. That's slightly worrying. How do you find middle-aged, Pete? Because I was thinking about, do I describe myself as a middle-aged white man? But I still describe myself as young for the next 2 weeks. But then I've got to change my lingo and my language, I think. I don't feel very old. That's great. But I watched my teenage years lived out on the screen and realised, actually, I became a Christian in 1983. Everything about 1983 I absolutely love. I'd love us to go fully back to 1983. Everything about the music, everything about the TV, everything about society, I would love us to go back there and create church as it was in 1983. It would be great for me, but I'd probably be the only person in it. We can't go back to something that we long to see because it's our story. We've got to create a new story. As we journey out, we've got to create a new story. I also am conscious of the statement Mark Twain made, where he declared, "The rumours of my death are grossly exaggerated." Actually, I think the church needs to claim that statement as well. There is a lot of death, and many, Eunice and I were chatting about the Methodist Church and statistics, and there's all kinds of statistics flowing around both in Church House and out in the connection about where we're going to land post this. period of pandemic, but also post-decisions of conference and all kinds of things. Where are we going to land in terms of numbers? And I've heard of numerous numbers. We've talked about maybe we'll get to 2/3 what we were. I heard a figure from somebody fairly senior who said we might get down to 65,000 members. That would be fairly catastrophic, really. I don't know, if we get to 65,000 members, we can't sustain the infrastructure that we currently have in existence. Everything has to change. We have to think differently. So at every level of our life, post this journey, things have to change. Number of trends. I'm conscious I want to give you your time, Eunice, as well. So I don't want to... It's easier when you get up here because you get excited about stuff. You want to just do what you want to do in your workshop, and I can't do what I'm going to do on the workshop. We'll go on. I'll talk about this in the workshop, not now, but one of the strange things I've done with a friend of mine named Jeff Bond, who some of you may know, in this region, is plant a church during lockdown. It's a bizarre time to plant a new church, but we planted initially online and grew a community online, and we've also now started our second, what we're calling our campus. We have an online campus, and our face-to-face campus meets in Leek each Sunday afternoon. And what's key for us in that, as we journey forward, is what the gathering, and the name is the gathering is not the focus of who we are. What we do on Sunday is simply about equipping people to be the church Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, where they find themselves. So one of the key elements of our Sunday gathering is something called TTT. This time tomorrow, and we interview a member of the congregation to find out what they'll be doing this time tomorrow in their work context, because that's where they're a disciple of Jesus Christ. And everything we do on a Sunday should equip them to be the followers of Jesus in that context. The be-all and end-all is not what we do on Sunday. It's about enabling people to communicate faith, to live faith in the context in which they find themselves. But I'll share a bit more about that later. We'll move on. If we can. I can't. Are we able to go to the next one? Ooh. Oh, there we go. Oh, I am moving on. We're going to have a conversation around some trends and see how these work in your context. Some of these you'll have been talking about for a long time because there were trends that were emerging pre-pandemic and may have been kind of enhanced or moved forward quicker as a result of pandemic. The first is being the church will become more important than going to church as we journey out of this pandemic. Being disciples will be far more important than gathering and the doing and the place that we go to. And we can have a conversation about that. Second one is new metrics of effectiveness will emerge. How we count whether we are successful. Of course, the Methodist Church historically has done their October count. Success has been how many people we get to a certain place at 10:30 on a Sunday morning and what age they are. That's what we've counted. Is that success? In this new world in which we find ourselves, there has to be a whole new way of measuring faithfulness and transformation and what it means to be church together. So we'll have some conversation around that. Churches will be more community orientated. Whichever word it is. Churches will be. This was emerging long ago. Our focus and our shift on community, but I think this absolutely has to continue. Healthy post-pandemic churches will become honest inquiry, will welcome honest inquiry and dialogue. An integrity about conversation, an integrity about questions, an integrity about trauma, an integrity about the pain that we carry, and bringing that into the midst, an integrity and honesty with dialogue. A high flex model of participation. One of the words we've started using alongside the word hybrid is the word high flex at Cliff. It comes from conversation directly out of Manchester University, who've started to talk about university courses being high flex rather than just hybrid. It's not an either-or option of online or on-site in terms of teaching. There needs to be absolute flexibility in the way we are, whether we choose to be on-site or whether we choose to be online, and we might move between those two. in our heads, when we planted the gathering in Leek as a face-to-face, we thought that would be a separate campus to the online campus. What we're finding is there's crossover between those two things. People aren't either only ever online or only ever on site. They're choosing between those two and moving between those two. And we have to create flexibility within that process. And in a teaching context for us, there has to be flexibility, particularly as we journey out of pandemic. Some weeks the student may be on site. The following week, of course, they may test positive for something and need to be online. And there has to be complete flexibility in how we do things. Now, moving forward, particularly in a global context, flexibility allows folk from around the world to choose whether to be on site or online for different units of teaching, for example. Church programming will be less Sunday-centric and will focus on opportunities throughout the week. You're modelling some of that already as Coffee Shop Sunday as well. Carry on. There'll be more emphasis on small group gatherings and less emphasis on large group gatherings. Small is becoming the new big, if that makes sense. But anyway, we can talk about that as we journey on. Surprising partnerships will be formed. Local churches will become more collaborative. We'll work with more and more people, less competitive. And we'll begin to realise that we aren't about transformation on our own as Christian communities. There'll be partners in our communities who are also about transformation, and particularly transformation of community. And we'll find those partnerships. The gospel will be presented positively as good news. So that kind of guilt-ridden, judgment-infused, condescending approach to evangelism will give way to Jesus-centered conversations about healing and forgiveness and transformation and finding hope in a hopeless context. Somewhere there. Oh. Effective evangelism will become more relational and less transactional. I'll unpack that in our group. I've had my 15 minutes. But we're going to have a conversation around each of those statements and each of those headings. I'll kind of unpack where I find myself in that in a new church plant and in a college setting and in my own life journey. And then hopefully I'll hear from some of you in Coffee Shop Sunday or church context in which you find yourselves, and we'll have a conversation together. Thank you. I'll stop there, Ian.
I'm not quite sure where middle age starts and where middle age ends. Our next speaker is the Church on the Margins officer for the Methodist Church. I think I've got that right, but it really is a pleasure, Eunice, to welcome you to speak to us and introduce what you're going to be talking about.
Good morning, friends. It's really lovely to be here, and welcome to all of you online. As our friend said, I'm Eunice Attwood. I'm a deacon in the Methodist Church, and I'm the Church at the Margins officer for the Methodist Church with the Evangelism and Growth team. You're probably already thinking, that's a very weird title for a job. The church is exceptional, I find, at having weird titles for jobs. I'm not the only person with a weird title. But I'm part of the Evangelism and Growth team, and Church at the Margins is part of the God for All vision. The God for All vision, and friends online, if you're in another country, you might want to just go on the Methodist Church website. All of our resources are freely available. God for All is a vision, it's not a strategy. God doesn't need strategies. God is God. God for All is a vision, and it's about deepening our discipleship, and it's about making disciples of Jesus in every way. Digital, as Peter's already talked about, and challenging our preconceptions, as Ashley has talked about, of what we think church is. God for All is a celebration of a mixed ecology, different ways of being church. And acknowledging that some of the ways that we do church, whatever we do, we put church on at 10:30 on a Sunday, it excludes some people, doesn't it? People who can't be available for 10:30 on a Sunday, people who never come into a building. So we need greater variety. We've got the second slide, please. I want to talk in my workshop about church at the margins. This is something I'm absolutely passionate about. And I do think we need to just explain the language a bit. It's not suggesting that the church, the established church as we know it, is at the centre. Language is always going to be limited. This is about church at the economic margins. The COVID pandemic has revealed pre-existing inequality of poverty. Actually, the pandemic of poverty across the world. Those of you who are watching in different countries, I'm really sorry. I want to apologise for the fact that many of the Western countries are taking up all of the vaccine, and you may not have had it. That's shocking. At the beginning of the pandemic, the leader of the World Health Organization said, until everyone is safe, no one is safe. Because, friends, that's how diseases work. Viruses don't know about borders. Viruses don't know about money. Viruses just sweep across. Until everyone is protected, none of us are safe here, because anyone could fly into the country and bring it from a country that's impoverished. So we need to get our act together. One of the things that the pandemic has absolutely exacerbated is the reality that 14 million people in the UK lived in poverty. That's only going to rise. It's been heartbreaking to see what has happened with universal credit. That £20 that was taken away, that Boris says is to make sure everyone's motivated to get back to work. Friends, 50% of people on universal credit in this country are working. They don't need a job, they've already got one, but it doesn't give them enough money to manage. One of the things I've observed is the way in which there are many disconnections. So I've put a picture up there, that's of the Arctic. That's a big fracture that's emerged in the Arctic. And that's emerged because of climate change. Climate change, and those of you watching from around the world will know this, will impact on the poorest communities the most. Because the biggest protector in a pandemic is wealth. So if you haven't got access to money, you are going to be more vulnerable. And I think what we're seeing and what the pandemic has shown us is the many fractures in our communities between us and God, between us and other people, between us and the non-human world. So this isn't, the climate change is massively impacting on poorer communities. So Mr. Wesley, when he preached this sermon 98, I don't know how many of you have read it, his sermon on visiting the sick, friends abroad, I don't know if you've read this. In 1786, he said that one great reason why the rich in general have so little sympathy for the poor is that they seldom visit them. They don't know and they don't care to know. And friends, I really want to challenge myself and the whole church about what that means. The fact that we have become disconnected from people in poorer communities. I know that around this community there is a lot of poverty. And I know that often we've shut the churches in the most deprived and struggling communities. And we've pulled resources more centrally. And I want to say sorry to God that we've done that. I want to say sorry to God that we've often pulled out of places that needed those church communities the most. And sometimes they really did need the building, because we may have taken away the place in which the community could meet. Final slide, please. So, in my workshop, I want to talk about church at the margins, church at the economic margins. And the vision for this is new Christian communities amongst and led by people who are economically vulnerable. And this is church at the margins, on the margins. We're not taking God to the margins. How arrogant would that be? Hey, how arrogant. God's already there. We don't need to welcome God into those communities. God's rocked up and loving those people. And actually, those people are fabulous. Some of the strongest people you'll come across are people who are surviving poverty. The woman who every day is working at 3 jobs in order to feed her kids. Some of the strongest people. So these aren't people, whilst they may have been robbed of resources, in many ways they have strength, they have many gifts. And one of the challenges I want to receive is the gifts of those people. I want them to also transform me, and I want them to teach me about what it is to experience God in places of real difficulty. I believe wholeheartedly that poverty contradicts the will of God. I believe that if we abandon the poor, we abandon the gospel. And I actually believe being attentive to this and to this vision could change us. Because I don't think Church at the Margins and serving people who are experiencing poverty and engaging with communities, I actually think this could change me. I think this could transform me. And I think that actually we need to receive the gifts, to be transformed as a church by people. So, whether you come to my workshop or not, I hope that you will be attentive, because I think that actually this is not an optional extra on a menu of Christian discipleship. This isn't something that enthusiastic people join in. There's a lot of deacons here today. This isn't a job just for deacons. Deacons often are attentive to this in the Methodist Church in the UK. It has to be part of all our Christian discipleship, because it's not an optional extra. Jesus didn't say that. Jesus said that when we meet the poor, we see God. Friends, I want to rock up to that vision. So, come to my workshop if you would like to.
I sort of feel a bit embarrassed about the next bit, because having thought about those who maybe have little or less than many of us, we're about to share in cutting a cake. And Trevor, I hope, is going to explain to us all about this. It's a cake for celebrating as being the Coffee Shop Sunday family. And to our friends online, I hope you managed to get a virtual piece of cake.
Oh, I look dangerous with it. Yeah, this is just a bonus. And in a kind of way, it sums up Coffee Shop Sunday for me. I was preaching at Woodside Avenue, a Methodist church in Coventry recently. And, you know, when you get feedback as a local preacher, the hymns were nice, Trevor. I enjoyed the reading. But I was absolutely amazed, staggered, pleased, gobsmacked when Lorraine from Woodside approached me and she said, I'd love to come to this convention, but we're away somewhere with the family. But can I make you a cake? I thought, yes, please. And it's just wonderful. I don't know whether we're going to be able to enable you to see this. But I just want to say thank you publicly to Lorraine and Duncan. They made this beautiful cake. And I'm told there are 100 pieces in this cake. So we're going to cut the cake ceremonially, and I'm going to invite Matt and Eunice, I think. Did you know Eunice? And Matt. And then we're going to, I'll try and get a camera, John, that we can perhaps get a snapshot of maybe we could tilt it so that people could see or something. I don't know whether we feel safe, Eunice and Matt. So we're going to try and get a view of this on camera somehow, if we can. It's just so beautiful and just a wonderful gesture that Lorraine made this cake. And it's embellished with a logo, Coffee Shop Sunday, and Jesus Christ, my living hope, within it as well, which is one of our strap lines. So I don't know whether people are able to see it. Yeah. Well, you can do that, Ian. Ask Annie about my clumsiness.
If it falls on the floor, it's my fault. But I hope perhaps people can get a better view of it now.
So thank you, Lorraine, in your absence, and maybe you'll catch up with us online at some point when you're free. But it's a really lovely gesture, which we were so surprised about and so pleased with. So I'm going to ask Matt and Eunice to cut it ceremonially, and then I think we'll have some for you for your coffee, I believe. That's the plan. And are you going to tell people about the workshops, Ian? Yeah.
We just want to make it clear we're both married. Just in case anyone thinks this is a different
So we're coming up to our coffee break. So I guess you could say this is coffee break Saturday now. But just before we go for that coffee break, just to explain what will happen after the coffee break, at 12 o'clock we have 3 workshops. Here in the main hall, Pete Phillips will be leading his workshop. Downstairs in the lower hall, Ashley will be leading his workshop, and in the Eden Hall, Eunice will be leading her workshop. If you need to know where those are, there are maps on the wall, and I can see Simon standing conveniently in front of one of the maps just at the moment, so that we can perhaps find out where everything is. But we are going to have half an hour for coffee before we do that. During that half hour, the prayer room in the chapel downstairs will be open in the Aldersgate Chapel. Please find time to go into the prayer room either during coffee break or during the lunch break this afternoon. And also, we're delighted to have the bookshop from the Methodist Book Centre in Stoke-on-Trent, Christian Resources for All. And do please find time to visit the bookshop and to spend lots of money. And on my right, we have Coffee Shop Sunday Resources. We have craft stalls as well. Please visit those. And if you still have any money left after that, 2 things. There's a small stall downstairs being run by a lady called Rose Bentley. Please support Rose. And you will see by the door, there's what looks like a post box. And it's a post box which is inviting those who feel able to make a donation, a contribution towards the costs of today. So go and enjoy your coffee, go and spend as much money as you can, go and pray in the prayer room if you have time, but mostly use this time for fellowship, for friendship, for meeting up with people, for making new friends. And we'll adjourn again now until 12 o'clock.